Lucas Grant sat in the corner of the research vessel's cafeteria, hunched over his crossword puzzle. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he didn't notice. He was stuck on 7 down. Ancient Keeper of Secrets, 5 letters. His pencil tapped against the worn paper as he thought. The intercom crackled to life above him. All personnel to the observation deck. We found something. Lucas marked his place in the puzzle and headed toward the deck. He wasn't really supposed to be here. When the Endeavour left Earth 6 months ago, he'd been listed as additional research support, which was a polite way of saying they needed to fill a spare bunk, and he'd applied. Lucas was a cryptographer, but not a famous one. He worked on old Earth codes for museums, breaking ciphers from centuries past. It was quiet work that let him do what he loved, solve puzzles. The observation deck was crowded when he arrived. Through the massive windows, Lucas saw something that made him forget about his crossword entirely. A sphere hung in space so perfectly round it looked artificial, and it was huge. The captain had told them the dying star nearby was their destination, but nobody had mentioned this. "That's not natural," someone whispered. Captain Patricia Hayes stood at the front of the room, her gray hair tied back in a tight bun. She was a no-nonsense woman who'd been commanding vessels for 20 years. "You're right. Initial scans show it's a structure. An old one. We estimate about 10,000 years. The room erupted in excited chatter. 10,000 years was older than any alien civilization humanity had encountered so far. Humans had only been in space for 300 years. They were the newcomers in a galaxy full of species who'd been traveling the stars for millennia. "There's more," Patricia continued. "We're not the first to find it. There are abandoned research stations from at least 6 different species around the structure. All of them just left their equipment and departed." Dr. Alan Cooper pushed his way to the front. He was a xenoarchaeologist, someone who studied ancient alien cultures. He was brilliant and he knew it, which made him difficult to work with. "This could be an architect's site," he said, his voice filled with awe. The legendary first civilization. Lucas had heard stories about the architects. Every spacefaring species had legends about them, a race so advanced they'd simply vanished one day, leaving behind mysteries across the galaxy. Most scientists thought they were just myths. "We're sending a team over," Patricia announced. "Dr. Cooper will lead. Lieutenant Karen Price will handle security. We'll also bring our linguistics expert and our cryptographer." Lucas felt everyone's eyes turn toward him. He was the only cryptographer on board. Dr. Cooper's expression soured. "Captain, with respect, we need serious academics for this. Not someone who works on old Earth puzzles." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Mr. Grant is qualified. He comes with us." 2 hours later, Lucas found himself in a shuttle heading toward the sphere. Karen Price sat across from him, checking her weapons. She was young for a security officer, only 28, with sharp eyes that constantly scanned for threats. She caught him looking and gave him a small smile. "First time approaching an ancient alien structure?" she asked. "First time approaching any alien structure," Lucas admitted. "I usually work in climate-controlled archives. Stay close to me. We don't know what we'll find." The shuttle docked at what their instruments suggested was an entrance. As they stepped out onto the structure's surface, Lucas felt a slight vibration through his boots. The sphere was active even after 10,000 years. The entrance was covered in patterns. They swirled and curved across the surface, glowing with a faint blue light. Lucas moved closer, fascinated. They looked almost like mathematical equations, but something about them felt different. "We've documented 43 different species who've tried to open this," Dr. Cooper said, consulting his tablet. "Every single one failed. The Vryn spent 2 centuries here. The Chithraks brought their best quantum computers. Nothing worked. What is it?" Lucas asked. "A door? We think it's a lock. The patterns seem to respond to touch and proximity, but they change. Every time someone thinks they've figured out the sequence, it shifts to something new." Lucas pulled out his notebook, the same one where he kept his crossword puzzles. He began sketching the patterns. Dr. Cooper snorted. "You're going to solve a 10,000-year-old alien lock with a pencil and paper?" "I'm just observing," Lucas said quietly. He'd learned long ago not to argue with people like Cooper. Let them think what they wanted. They spent 6 hours documenting the entrance. The patterns were complex, but Lucas noticed something interesting. Parts of them repeated, but never exactly the same way. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't quite place what. As they prepared to return to the Endeavor, Lucas placed his hand on the structure. The pattern shifted, moving toward his palm. Everyone froze. "Don't move," Karen said, her hand on her weapon. But the patterns didn't feel threatening. They circled Lucas's hand almost playfully, like curious fish in a pond. Then they settled back into their previous configuration. "Fascinating," Dr. Cooper muttered. "It responded to him more than it did to any of us." Back on the Endeavor, Lucas couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those patterns. He got up and made himself coffee in the small galley, then pulled out his crossword puzzle. Ancient Keeper of Secrets, 5 letters. He stared at the clue, then looked at his sketch of the alien patterns. Something clicked in his mind. The patterns didn't just look like math. They looked like the structure of a cryptic crossword clue. Misdirection, multiple meanings. A puzzle that required lateral thinking, not just computation. "Vault," he said aloud. "The answer is vault." He wrote it in his crossword, then looked back at his sketch. If he was right, if this was more like a word puzzle than a math problem, then the aliens had been approaching it all wrong. They'd been trying to calculate the answer when they needed to play with it. The next morning, Patricia called a meeting. "I've received word that we're not alone anymore. 3 alien vessels are en route. They heard about our discovery and they're claiming prior rights to investigate." "On what grounds?" Karen asked. "They were here first, thousands of years ago. According to galactic law, that gives them some claim." Patricia looked at Lucas. "Which means we have limited time. Mr. Grant, what have you learned?" Lucas hesitated. Dr. Cooper was staring at him with barely concealed contempt. But Patricia had asked, so he answered, "I think it's not a math problem. I think it's a language problem. The patterns feel like wordplay, like a puzzle that needs creativity, not just processing power." "That's absurd," Dr. Cooper said. "An advanced civilization wouldn't create a lock based on something as primitive as wordplay." "Maybe that's why nobody solved it," Lucas replied. "Maybe everyone's been too advanced to see the simple answer." Patricia considered this. "The alien ships will arrive in 3 days. Mr. Grant, you have that long to prove your theory. Full access to the structure. Dr. Cooper, you'll assist him." Dr. Cooper looked like he wanted to argue, but Patricia's expression stopped him. For 3 days, Lucas lived at the entrance to the sphere. He brought his coffee maker and his collection of crossword puzzles. Karen stayed with him for security, and she turned out to be good company. She'd never done crosswords before, so Lucas taught her. "Why do you like these so much?" she asked one evening, frowning at a clue. "Because they're fun," Lucas said. "People always think puzzles need a purpose, but sometimes the purpose is just the joy of solving them." He spent hours watching the patterns, touching them, trying different approaches, and slowly he began to understand. The lock wasn't testing intelligence. It was testing something else entirely. Creativity, playfulness, the willingness to try something that might not work. On the 3rd day, as he sat drinking his morning coffee and working through a particularly tricky crossword, Lucas had an idea. He approached the patterns and began interacting with them the way he would a crossword puzzle, not trying to force a solution but playing with possibilities, testing, guessing, being wrong, and trying again. The patterns responded. They began to shift in ways they hadn't before, reorganizing themselves into new configurations. Lucas felt a thrill of excitement. He was right. This wasn't a lock that needed to be picked. It was a puzzle that needed to be enjoyed. Dr. Cooper watched from a distance, his tablet forgotten in his hands. Karen stood beside Lucas, ready to pull him back if something went wrong, but her eyes were wide with wonder. "I'll be damned," Cooper muttered. "He's actually doing it." Lucas worked for another hour, following his intuition more than his training. And then, with a sound like a deep bell ringing, a section of the sphere retracted. Not much, just a small panel about a meter across. But it was the first time in 10,000 years that anyone had gotten the structure to open. Everyone stared at the opening. Behind it, they could see another layer of patterns, even more complex than the first. Patricia's voice came over their communicators. "Lucas, the alien ships just arrived. They're requesting permission to dock." Lucas looked at the opening he'd created, then at his cold coffee and his half-finished crossword puzzle. He smiled. "Tell them we're just getting started," he said. The puzzle had recognized him. After 10,000 years and 43 different species, it had finally found someone who understood. Someone. The alien ships were impressive. Lucas watched them dock with the Endeavour through the observation window, each one representing a different civilization. The largest belonged to the Vryn, a species of reptilian beings who claimed to be the oldest spacefaring race in this sector of the galaxy. Their ship gleamed like polished bronze covered in symbols that hurt to look at for too long. Next came the Chithrax vessel, smaller but more elegant. The Chithrax were insectoid with multiple eyes and delicate limbs that moved in unsettling coordination. They were known as the galaxy's best mathematicians. If anyone should have cracked the sphere's code, it should have been them. The third ship was a Luxon craft, and it barely looked like a ship at all. The Luxon were crystalline beings who experienced time differently than most species. They thought in centuries the way humans thought in years. "They're not going to be happy," Karen said, standing beside Lucas. She'd become something of a friend over the past few days. "You opened part of the sphere. They've been trying for thousands of years." "I only opened one small section," Lucas pointed out. "There's still plenty of mystery left." "That's not how they'll see it." Karen was right. When the alien delegation arrived in the conference room an hour later, their mood was cold. Ambassador Thexkar of the Vryn towered over the humans, her scales shifting colors to display her irritation. Scholar Quinmora of the Chithrax clicked her mandibles in what Lucas had learned was their version of a dismissive snort. High Researcher Bolvan, the Luxon representative, simply glowed a dull red which meant displeasure. "We claim prior right to the structure," Thexkar announced, her voice like gravel. "My people discovered it 4,000 years ago. We have documented evidence." "My people were there before yours," Quinmora countered. 6,000 years ago, we attempted to decode the entrance. We have more claim than you." "Time is irrelevant," Bolvan said, their crystalline form chiming softly. "I personally spent 50 years studying the structure. My research alone gives me authority here." Patricia stood at the head of the table, unmoved by their arguments. "With respect, none of you succeeded in opening it. Mr. Grant did." In 3 days, the room fell silent. All three aliens turned their attention to Lucas, who suddenly wished he was back in his quiet archive on Earth. "This human?" Thexkar leaned down to examine Lucas closely. "This small young human opened the vault?" "Part of it," Lucas said quietly. "Just a small part?" "Impossible," Quinmora declared. "We brought quantum computers capable of processing trillions of calculations per second. We analyzed every possible mathematical sequence. How could a human succeed where we failed?" Dr. Cooper cleared his throat. Lucas could tell he was enjoying this despite his earlier doubts. Mr. Grant approached it as a linguistic puzzle rather than a mathematical one. He used pattern recognition from solving word puzzles. "Word puzzles?" Bolvan's glow shifted to confused purple. "You solved a 10,000-year-old lock with word games?" "Crossword puzzles, specifically," Lucas said. He pulled out his notebook and showed them his sketches. "The patterns reminded me of cryptic clues. They use misdirection and lateral thinking. When I interacted with them playfully instead of trying to calculate a solution, they responded." The three aliens exchanged looks. Quinmora's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign she was thinking. "This makes no sense. Advanced civilizations move beyond language-based problem-solving. Pure mathematics is universal." "Maybe that's the problem," Patricia suggested. "Maybe you're all too advanced." Thexkar's scales flushed angry orange. "You insult us?" "I'm stating a possibility. You've all evolved past certain types of thinking. Humans haven't. We still play games. We still value activities that have no practical purpose. Maybe that's what the structure was designed to test." "Preposterous," Quinmora said, but her tone was less certain now. "Then explain how he succeeded," Patricia challenged. Nobody had an answer for that. After much negotiation, they reached an agreement. The aliens would share all their research on the structure. In return, Lucas would be given the lead in attempting to open it further, with alien observers permitted. Nobody was happy with this arrangement, but everyone wanted to see what was inside badly enough to accept it. Lucas found himself with access to thousands of years of accumulated data. The aliens had tried everything. Mathematical sequences based on universal constants, quantum entanglement patterns, dimensional folding algorithms, gravitational wave harmonics. They'd approached the problem with the most advanced computing power in the galaxy, and all of it had failed. "Because they were trying too hard," Lucas muttered, reading through another report. He was in his quarters drinking coffee and eating a sandwich. His crossword puzzle sat on the table, partially completed. "What was that?" Karen asked. She'd taken to checking on him regularly, making sure he ate and slept. The aliens made her nervous, and she felt better knowing where Lucas was. They were trying too hard, Lucas repeated. Look at this. The Chithraks threw their best supercomputers at it. The structure responded by becoming more complex. The more processing power they used, the harder it got, like it was adapting, or like it was responding to their approach. When you attack a problem with brute force, it fights back, but when I approached it gently, playfully, it opened up. Karen sat down across from him. So what's your plan? I don't have one. I just do what I normally do. Coffee, crosswords, observation. When something occurs to me, I try it. If it doesn't work, I try something else. That's it? That's your method? Lucas shrugged. I know it sounds stupid, but it's how I've always solved puzzles. You can't force creativity. You have to let it happen. Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas established a routine at the structure. Every morning, he arrived with his coffee and his crossword puzzle. He'd sit near the entrance, solving clues and occasionally glancing at the patterns. When inspiration struck, he'd try something. Most attempts did nothing. Some made the patterns shift in interesting ways. The aliens watched, growing increasingly frustrated. Thexkar couldn't understand how sitting and doing word puzzles constituted work. Quinn Mora kept suggesting mathematical approaches that Lucas politely ignored. Bolvan observed silently, their crystalline form shifting through various colors as they thought. This is a waste of time, Thexkar announced after the first week. He sits, he drinks, he scribbles in his book. This is not research. He opened the first section, Patricia reminded her. Give him time. Time? My people spent centuries here, and got nowhere, Karen pointed out, her hand resting casually on her weapon. Maybe centuries of effort isn't what's needed. On the 10th day, Lucas noticed something. He was working on a crossword clue. Goes forward by going back. 9 letters. He stared at the words, thinking about palindromes and reversals. Then he looked at the patterns on the structure. There was a sequence that almost repeated, but not quite. It went one direction, then seemed to reverse, but the reversal wasn't exact. It was like a mirror that showed you something slightly different than your reflection. That's it, Lucas breathed. He approached the structure, Karen close behind him. The alien observers perked up, sensing something was happening. Lucas began tracing the pattern with his hand, following it forward. Then he traced it backward, but made small changes as he went. The pattern wasn't meant to be exactly reversed. It was meant to be reflected with variations, like looking at something from a different perspective. The structure hummed. The patterns began to glow brighter, reorganizing themselves. Lucas kept working, following his intuition more than any logical system. Forward, then back, then forward again with changes. A conversation, not a calculation. Incredible, Bolvan chimed. The structure is responding to imprecision, to creative variation. That should not work, Quinn Mora insisted, but her eyes were fixed on what Lucas was doing. Lucas finished the sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with that same deep bell sound, another section retracted. This one was larger, revealing a passage that led deeper into the structure. The aliens erupted in their various forms of excitement. Thexkar's scales flashed through a rainbow of colors. Quinn Mora's mandibles clicked so rapidly they blurred. Bolvan glowed brilliant gold, but Lucas was focused on something else. Inside the passage, he could see more patterns. These were different from the outer ones. More complex, but also more playful. They seemed to dance across the walls, inviting interaction. It's like it's happy we're here, he said quietly. Patricia came down to the structure herself to see what Lucas had found. She stood at the entrance to the passage, looking at the patterns inside. The structure wants to be solved. It's been waiting for someone who would play along instead of trying to force it open. A lock that wants to be opened? Dr. Cooper said. He'd come down too, his earlier skepticism replaced by scientific curiosity. That's a contradiction. Not a lock, Lucas corrected. A puzzle. Puzzles are meant to be solved. They exist to be enjoyed. This structure isn't trying to keep us out. It's testing us to see if we're worthy to come in. Testing for what? Thexkar demanded. Lucas looked at her, then at the other aliens. Not intelligence. You're all far more intelligent than me. Not computing power. You've got technology I can't even understand. I think it's testing for something else, creativity. The passage curved gently downward, lit by the glowing patterns that covered every surface. Lucas walked slowly, running his fingers along the wall. The patterns responded to his touch, rippling outward like water. He could hear Patricia's voice in his earpiece checking on him every few minutes, but he barely registered it. His attention was completely focused on the structure around him. After about 50 meters, the passage opened into a chamber. Lucas stopped at the threshold, his breath catching. The room was spherical, and every centimeter of its surface was covered in moving, shifting patterns. They were beautiful, like watching northern lights dance across a night sky. In the center of the room floated a holographic display. It showed a sequence of symbols that Lucas didn't recognize but somehow understood. They were a question, not in words but in pure concept. The structure was asking him something. "I'm in some kind of chamber," Lucas said into his communicator. "There's a holographic display. I think it's asking me a question." "What kind of question?" Patricia's voice crackled back. "I'm not sure yet. Give me a minute." Lucas approached the display, pulling out his crossword puzzle. He often did his best thinking while working on something familiar. His pencil moved across the paper as his mind worked on both puzzles at once. The crossword clue said, "Empty container that holds everything, 7 letters, nothing." The answer was nothing. An empty container was nothing, yet the concept of nothing was something. It held everything because it had infinite potential. Lucas looked back at the holographic question. The structure wasn't asking for information. It was asking for understanding. It wanted to know if he could think about concepts that contradicted themselves, things that were true and false at the same time. He reached out and began manipulating the hologram, forming his answer not in symbols but in patterns. He created a loop that fed back into itself, a paradox made visual. The structure chimed and the hologram shifted into something new. Another question. This one was harder. Lucas spent 3 hours in that chamber answering questions that had no right answers. The structure wasn't testing knowledge. It was testing the ability to think in ways that defied normal logic, to see beyond binary true or false thinking into the messy, creative space where real innovation happened. When he finally emerged from the passage, he found quite a crowd waiting. Patricia and Karen were there along with Dr. Cooper and the 3 alien observers. They all stared at him expectantly. "Well?" Patricia asked. "It's interviewing me," Lucas said. "The structure isn't just locked. It's conducting a test. Each chamber asks different questions and you have to answer them in creative ways. Pure logic won't work. You need to think in metaphors, paradoxes, and contradictions." "What kind of questions?" Dr. Cooper asked, his scientific curiosity fully engaged now. Lucas tried to explain, but the concepts didn't translate well into words. Things like, what increases when you divide it? What's the sound of a color? How do you hold time in your hands? Those are nonsense questions, Quinn Morris said. They have no logical answers. Exactly, Lucas replied. They're not looking for logical answers. They're looking for creative ones. When I answered what increases when you divide it, I said fractions. When you divide a fraction, the number gets larger. It's technically true, but it's also playing with the meaning of words. Thexkar's scales shifted to thoughtful blue. You're saying the structure values word games over mathematics? Not over, alongside, it wants both. It wants the ability to see problems from multiple angles, to play with meanings, to find answers that are unexpected. Bolvan's crystalline form chimed softly. This is fascinating and disturbing. We've trained our civilizations to value efficiency and logic above all else. We've eliminated ambiguity from our languages. We've optimized our thinking processes. And in doing so, Patricia said quietly, you've lost the ability to think the way this structure requires. The aliens looked uncomfortable with this assessment, but they couldn't deny it. Lucas had gotten farther in 3 weeks than any of them had in thousands of years. I need to go back, Lucas said. There's more to explore, but I'd like to take my time. Rushing this feels wrong. How long? Patricia asked. Weeks, maybe months. The structure isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. They set up a small camp near the structure's entrance. Lucas established his routine again. Morning coffee, crossword puzzles. Hours spent in the structure exploring its passages and answering its questions. The aliens observed, taking notes but not interfering. Slowly, they began to understand what Lucas was doing. He wasn't working. He was playing. He approached each chamber with curiosity and joy, not grim determination. When he got stuck on a question, he didn't force it. He'd leave, work on his crossword, have some coffee, and come back with fresh eyes. "This is maddening," Thexkar said one evening. Lucas had spent the entire day solving crossword puzzles and hadn't entered the structure once. "He's wasting time, is he?" Karen challenged. She'd become protective of Lucas over the weeks. Or is he letting his subconscious work on the problem? Sometimes the best way to solve something is to stop trying. 2 weeks into his exploration, Lucas found something that changed everything. He'd made it through 5 chambers, each one presenting different types of questions. The 6th chamber was different. Instead of questions, it showed him images. They were recordings, Lucas realized. Historical documents from the species that built this place, the architects. He watched fascinated as the story unfolded. The architects had been brilliant. They'd mastered space travel millions of years before any current species. They'd solved problems of physics that the galaxy's greatest minds still struggled with. They'd achieved a form of technological transcendence, uploading their consciousness into vast computer networks, and then they'd stagnated. For thousands of years, the architects had existed in their perfect digital paradise, making incremental improvements to systems that already worked flawlessly. They were incredibly intelligent, capable of processing information at speeds that would make quantum computers look slow. But they couldn't create anything truly new. They'd lost the spark of creativity, the willingness to try things that might fail, the joy of discovery. Lucas watched the last recording with sadness. It showed an architect named Corveth, one of the few who'd resisted full digitization. Corveth had realized what they'd lost, but by then it was too late. Their entire civilization had optimized itself into creative death, so Corveth had built the vaults. 7 of them scattered across the galaxy. Each one was designed as a test, a puzzle that could only be solved through creative, non-linear thinking. They were time capsules and warnings both. Inside each vault was technology and knowledge from the architects, but also a message: don't make our mistake. The recording ended with Corveth speaking directly to whoever solved the puzzle. If you're watching this, then you've succeeded where countless others have failed. You've proven that your species values creativity alongside logic. You've shown that you still know how to play. Guard this gift carefully. Never let efficiency destroy imagination. Never let optimization eliminate joy. The universe is not a problem to solve. It's a puzzle to enjoy. Lucas sat in silence after the recording ended. He understood now. The structure wasn't just a lock or a test. It was a lesson. The architects were teaching from beyond their extinction. He made his way back to the entrance where the others were waiting. The aliens had been growing more and more interested as Lucas progressed deeper into the structure. Even Quinn Mora had stopped dismissing his methods. "I need to show you all something," Lucas said. He led them into the structure, which had never allowed groups before. But now the passages widened to accommodate them, the patterns welcoming the crowd. Lucas brought them to the 6th chamber and played Corveth's recording. The aliens watched in stunned silence. When it ended, nobody spoke for a long moment. "We're making the same mistake," Bolvan finally said. "My people have been essentially unchanged for 10,000 years. We make small improvements, but nothing revolutionary. We haven't had a truly new idea in millennia." "Same with the Chithrax," Quinn Mora admitted, her mandibles drooping. "We perfect what exists. We don't create what doesn't." Thexkar's scales were gray, a color Lucas had learned meant deep thought or sadness. "The Vryn celebrate our stability, our consistency. We pride ourselves on not changing. But we've also stopped growing." Dr. Cooper looked shaken. "And humanity? Are we heading down the same path?" "Not yet," Lucas said. "We're still young. We still play. We still value things that have no practical purpose. But we could lose it. If we're not careful, we could optimize ourselves into the same corner the architects did." Patricia was staring at the now blank hologram where Corveth's image had been. "Is there more?" "In the structure?" "One more chamber," Lucas said. "I felt it when the recording ended. The structure opened a final passage. But I think we should go together. This isn't just my discovery anymore. It's everyone's." The final chamber was the largest yet. When they entered, lights activated throughout the space, revealing technology that made even the alien observers gasp. There were devices whose purpose Lucas couldn't begin to guess. Systems that seemed to fold space itself. Machines that hummed with barely contained power. Word spread fast. Within a week of Lucas's discovery, the news had reached every corner of explored space. A human had solved the vault, a young, Relatively unknown cryptographer had succeeded where the galaxy's greatest minds had failed for 10,000 years. The reaction was mixed. Some species were fascinated and wanted to learn more. Others were embarrassed that a species as young as humanity had accomplished what they couldn't. A few were suspicious, suggesting that Lucas had somehow cheated, or that the architects had made the puzzle easier over time. But nobody could deny the results. The vault was open. The technology inside was real, and the message from the architects was clear. Lucas found himself suddenly famous, which he hated. He'd never wanted attention. He just liked solving puzzles. Now, ships were arriving daily at the structure, each one carrying diplomats, scientists, or journalists who wanted to meet him. The Endeavor's small crew quarters weren't designed for this kind of traffic. "We need to leave," Patricia told Lucas one morning. They were in her office, which had become one of the few places Lucas could find peace. "Earth wants you home. They want to celebrate you. Parades, medals, the whole thing," Lucas grimaced. "I don't want a parade. I just want to do crossword puzzles and drink coffee." "I know, but you've become a symbol. Humanity's proof that we belong among the stars. You can't avoid it anymore." "What about the other vaults? Someone needs to find them." Patricia smiled. "That's being handled. The Galactic Council is forming a joint expedition. They're calling it the Crossword Initiative." Lucas laughed despite himself. "Really? Really? And they want you to lead it?" The weight of that settled on Lucas. Leading meant making decisions, giving speeches, dealing with politics, all the things he was terrible at. But it also meant solving more puzzles, exploring more architect technology, and maybe preventing other species from making the mistakes that had destroyed the architects. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll do it. But I need help. I can't do this alone. You won't have to. The council is assembling a team. Scientists, linguists, engineers, and they're recruiting from all species, not just humans." 2 weeks later, Lucas returned to Earth for the first time in 8 months. The reception was overwhelming. Thousands of people waited at the spaceport, cheering as he descended from the shuttle. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Lucas wanted to run back to the ship. Karen stayed close to him, her presence a comfort in the chaos. She'd been assigned as his permanent security detail, which Lucas suspected was Patricia's way of making sure he had at least one friend through all of this. The celebration lasted 3 days. Lucas attended dinners with politicians, gave interviews to major news networks, and endured a ceremony where the president of Earth gave him a medal for advancing humanity's place in the galactic community. He smiled and nodded and said the right things, but inside he was exhausted. On the 4th day, he finally got a break. He sat in a small cafe in his hometown, working on a crossword puzzle and drinking truly good coffee for the first time in months. The cafe owner, an elderly woman named Martha, didn't care that he was famous. She just kept his cup filled and left him alone. "Mind if I join you?" Lucas looked up to find Dr. Lisa Chen standing by his table. He knew of her. She was one of Earth's best linguists, specializing in alien languages and communication theory. She was in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "Please," Lucas said, gesturing to the empty chair. Lisa sat down, ordering her own coffee. "I've been assigned to your team for the Crossword Initiative. I wanted to introduce myself before we left. You're coming on the expedition, if you'll have me. I've studied the architect's language patterns from your reports. They're fascinating. Unlike anything I've ever seen, the way they blend mathematics and poetry, logic and metaphor. I think I can help interpret the other vaults." Lucas liked her immediately. She didn't treat him like a hero or a celebrity. She talked about the work, the puzzles, the actual interesting parts. "What do you know about crosswords?" he asked. "I've never done one," Lisa admitted. "Is that a problem?" Lucas pulled a spare puzzle from his bag. "Here, try this. It'll help you understand how I think." Lisa looked at the empty grid, then at the clues. She frowned, reading them carefully. Lucas watched as she worked through the logic, testing different words, erasing and trying again. She had good instincts. "This is harder than it looks," she said after 20 minutes. "I thought I'd be better at it since I work with languages." That's the point. Crosswords aren't really about language knowledge. They're about how you think. The willingness to try things that might be wrong. The ability to see multiple meanings in the same word, like the vault. Exactly like the vault. Over the next week, Lucas met the rest of his team. There was Dr. Peter Kim, a physicist who specialized in studying impossible problems. Commander Jake Morrison, a military strategist who'd been assigned despite Lucas's protest that they didn't need military presence. And to Lucas's surprise, Quinn Mora had volunteered to join them. "You opened the vault," the Chithrax scholar explained through her translator. "You showed me that my entire approach to problems was flawed. I want to learn your methods. I want to understand how humans think." "We mostly just guess and hope we're right," Lucas said honestly. "That should not work, but it does. That's what I want to study." They also had Bolvan, the Luxon researcher. Their crystalline form made them physically unique on the team, but their perspective was invaluable. Bolvan thought in time frames that made everyone else's head hurt, seeing patterns across centuries that others couldn't perceive. The team assembled on a new ship, the Pathfinder. It was smaller than the Endeavour, but better equipped for long-range exploration. Patricia had been promoted to admiral and couldn't come, but Karen was there, now officially the ship's head of security. Their destination was the second vault, located in a system near the edge of explored space. The journey would take 2 months. Lucas used the time to get to know his team better. He taught crosswords to anyone who wanted to learn. Lisa picked it up quickly, her linguistic skills making her a natural. Peter struggled at first, his physicist's brain wanting definitive answers, but he slowly learned to embrace ambiguity. Even Quinn Mora tried, though her Chithrax worldview made metaphorical thinking difficult. "Why is bark both a sound and a tree covering?" she asked one day, frustrated. "This is inefficient language design." "That's what makes it interesting," Lucas explained. "The ambiguity creates space for wordplay, for jokes, for poetry. Efficient language might be better for transmitting information, but it's terrible for creating art. Art is not practical, no, but it's necessary." The architects forgot that. Quinn Mora clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "Perhaps that is why we could not solve the vault. We have made our language too efficient. We have eliminated the impractical elements. But you're here now," Lisa pointed out, "learning to think differently. That's what the architects wanted. Not for one species to solve their puzzles, but for all species to learn from them." They arrived at the second vault 2 months later. It was different from the first. Instead of a perfect sphere, this one was a complex geometric shape that seemed to shift as you looked at it. It orbited a blue giant star, bathed in harsh radiation that made approach difficult. "The patterns are already visible," Peter said, studying the scans. "And they're nothing like the first vault. These look more like musical notation than language or mathematics." Lucas felt excitement building. A new puzzle. A new challenge. He grabbed his coffee thermos and his crossword puzzle book. Time to work. The landing team approached carefully. Unlike the first vault, this one seemed to react to their presence from a distance. Lights activated across its surface, and a sound began to emanate from it. Not quite music, but not quite noise either. Something in between. "It's singing to us," Lisa said, wonder in her voice. They spent the first day just listening. The vault's song changed constantly, responding to their movements and actions. When Lucas tapped his fingers against his leg, the song incorporated the rhythm. When Lisa hummed thoughtfully, new harmonics appeared. "It's not testing us yet," Lucas realized. "It's learning us, figuring out how we communicate." "Should we respond?" Jake asked. He'd been quiet since they arrived, clearly out of his depth. Military strategy wasn't useful here. Yes, but not with words. With music. They spent a week making music with the vault. Karen, it turned out, could sing beautifully. Peter played a mean harmonica. Lisa had a flute she'd brought from Earth. Even Quinn Mora participated, creating clicking rhythms with her mandibles that added texture to their impromptu band. Bolvan was the real surprise. The Luxon didn't make sound the way others did, but their crystalline form could resonate at different frequencies. They created chord progressions that made everyone stop and listen in awe. The vault seemed pleased. Its song became more complex, more beautiful, incorporating elements from everyone. It was building a language from their music, creating a way to communicate that transcended words. On the 8th day, the vault's entrance opened, not with a mechanical sound, but with a musical one. A perfect cadence that signaled completion. "Welcome, it's ready for us," Lucas said. He picked up his coffee and his crossword puzzle. "Let's see what this one has to teach us." The second vault's completion brought unexpected consequences. Species across the galaxy began to reconsider their approach to knowledge and progress. Universities that had focused solely on technical education started adding art programs. Research institutes that had eliminated inefficient fields like music and poetry began restoring them. Lucas watched this transformation from the Pathfinder with mixed feelings. He was glad the message was spreading, but worried it was spreading too fast. Change imposed from outside was different from change that grew naturally. He said as much to Lisa one evening over coffee. "You think it's too much?" she asked. They were in the observation deck, watching the stars drift by. The third vault was still 3 weeks away. "I think people are excited right now, but excitement fades. Real change takes time and commitment. I'm worried they'll try these new approaches for a few months, not see immediate results, and give up." "That's pessimistic for you." Lucas shrugged. "I'm a realist. Crossword puzzles taught me that. Sometimes the answer you think is right turns out to be wrong, and you have to start over. I just hope the galaxy doesn't give up at the first wrong answer." The third vault's location had been controversial. It sat in neutral space between the territories of two species that didn't like each other much, the Vryn and the Kesh. The Kesh were newcomers to the team, bird-like beings with iridescent feathers and sharp minds. They'd requested to send representatives on the expedition, and Lucas had agreed. The two Kesh scientists, Kriya and Telvin, didn't mix well with Thexkar, the Vryn ambassador who joined them from the first vault. Old grudges ran deep between their species. It made for tense meals in the ship's cafeteria. "We need to address this," Jake said to Lucas one afternoon. "The tension is affecting morale." "I know, but I'm not good with conflict. You solved a 10,000-year-old puzzle. You can handle two species who don't like each other." Lucas wasn't so sure, but he called a meeting anyway. Everyone gathered in the conference room. Humans, Chithrax, Luxon, Vryn, and Kesh. The air was thick with unspoken resentment. "We have a problem," Lucas said bluntly. "Some of us don't like each other. That's okay. You don't have to be friends, but we do have to work together. The vaults require it." "The Vryn betrayed my people 300 years ago," Kriya said, her feathers ruffling with anger. I don't care," Lucas interrupted. Everyone stared at him. He never interrupted people. "I don't care what happened 300 years ago. I care about what happens now." The architects destroyed themselves because they stopped being able to work together. They became so isolated in their perfect digital worlds that they forgot how to collaborate. "Is that what we want?" Silence filled the room. "We're going to the third vault," Lucas continued. "We don't know what it will test, but based on the first two, I'm guessing it'll require all of us working together. If we can't do that, we'll fail, and we'll prove that the galaxy hasn't learned anything from the architect's mistake." Thexkar's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a muted blue. "The human is right. Our old conflicts mean nothing compared to what we're trying to accomplish." Kriya looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Agreed. For the duration of this mission, our people's history is paused, not erased," Lucas clarified. "Paused, we'll still remember, but we won't let it control us." The tension didn't disappear completely, but it lessened. People started sitting together at meals who hadn't before. Conversations became easier. Small gestures of friendship appeared. Thexkar helping Kriya understand a technical manual. Telvin teaching Karen a Kesh song. The team was becoming more than just a crew. They were becoming a community. The third vault was stunning. It existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, appearing to flicker between different states of reality. Approaching it made Lucas's head hurt, as his brain tried to process something that shouldn't be possible. "It's beautiful," Lisa breathed, "and terrifying." Peter was running scans, his hands moving quickly across his console. "The dimensional instability is controlled, deliberate. This vault exists in at least 6 dimensions at once, maybe more." "How do we enter something that isn't entirely in our reality?" Jake asked. "Carefully," Lucas said. He was staring at the vault, his crossword puzzle forgotten in his lap. Something about the way it flickered reminded him of something, but he couldn't quite place what. They spent 3 days studying the vault before attempting entry. Unlike the first two, this one didn't invite interaction. It simply existed, flickering between states, waiting. On the 4th day, Lucas had a breakthrough. He'd been working on a particularly difficult crossword clue. exists and doesn't simultaneously? 15 letters. The answer was Schrödinger's cat, the famous quantum thought experiment about a cat that was both alive and dead until observed. That's it, he said suddenly, making everyone in the room jump. The vault is like Schrödinger's cat. It exists in multiple states until we observe it, but we're observing it wrong. Explain, Quinmora requested, her mandibles clicking with interest. We're trying to see all its states at once. That's making it flicker. But what if we stop trying? What if we just pick one state and commit to it? That sounds too simple, Peter said, but he was smiling. Which means it's probably right. Lucas approached the vault in a small shuttle alone. The others watched from the Pathfinder, ready to retrieve him if things went wrong. As he got closer, the vault's flickering increased. He was responding to his observation, to his attempt to pin it down into one reality. Lucas closed his eyes. He stopped trying to see the vault and just felt for it. Intuition over observation, faith over certainty. When he opened his eyes, the vault was solid. One state, one reality, and an entrance had appeared. The interior was disorienting. Rooms existed in spaces that shouldn't be able to contain them. Hallways led in directions that didn't make geometrical sense. Lucas walked through spaces where up and down were relative terms, where time seemed to move at different speeds. But he wasn't afraid. He'd learned to trust the vaults. They were strange, yes, but not dangerous. They were teachers, not threats. The puzzles in this vault tested perspective. One chamber could only be solved by looking at it from 5 different angles simultaneously. Another required understanding that the same event could be true and false depending on your frame of reference. The architects were teaching about relativity, about the importance of seeing things from multiple viewpoints. It took Lucas a week to navigate the vault alone. When he emerged, he was exhausted but exhilarated. This one isn't about individual creativity or artistic collaboration, he told the team. It's about perspective, about understanding that truth can look different depending on where you stand. The architects wanted whoever solved this to understand that there isn't one right way to see the universe. That's a philosophical lesson, not a technical one, Lisa observed. All the vaults have been teaching philosophy, Lucas replied. The technology is just a bonus. The real gift is the wisdom. The third vault's completion triggered something unexpected. A message appeared on the Pathfinder's communication system, originating from the vault itself. It was addressed to Lucas specifically. You have done well, the message read in perfect English. 3 vaults opened. 3 lessons learned, but the remaining 4 will test you differently. They will test not just your mind, but your character. Not just your creativity, but your morality. Are you prepared for what comes next? The message was signed simply, Corveth. Lucas stared at the message, his coffee growing cold in his hand. The architect's last survivor had anticipated that someone would make it this far. And they'd left warnings. What do you think it means? Karen asked. She'd been reading over his shoulder. I think the first 3 vaults were screening tests, making sure whoever got this far had the right mindset. But the last 4 are the real challenge. How do you know?
Because that's how good puzzles work.
You start with easier challenges to teach the solver your language. Then you hit them with the hard stuff. Lisa joined them, followed by the rest of the team. They all read Corveth's message, their expressions growing serious. If the first 3 tested creativity, art, and perspective, Peter said slowly, what might the last 4 test? Morality, ethics, empathy, sacrifice. Lucas ticked them off on his fingers. The soft skills that are hard to measure but essential for civilization. That's going to be harder than anything we've faced. Jake said, yes, but it's also going to be more important. The team took a week off before heading to the 4th vault. They needed rest, needed time to process what they'd learned. Lucas spent his time doing crosswords, drinking coffee, and thinking about Corveth's message. The architects had built these vaults as a warning, yes, but also as a test. They wanted to ensure that whoever claimed their knowledge was worthy of it, that they wouldn't repeat the architect's mistakes. 3 vaults down meant Lucas and his team had proven they could think creatively, work collaboratively, and see from multiple perspectives. But could they make hard moral choices? Could they sacrifice personal gain for the greater good? Could they show true empathy for beings different from themselves? Lucas didn't know, and that uncertainty both frightened and excited him. One evening he found Quinmora on the observation deck. The Chithrax, Fourth vault broke Lucas's heart before he even entered it. It appeared as a garden. Impossible in the vacuum of space, but there it was. A sphere covered in growing things with an atmosphere held in place by technology Lucas couldn't begin to understand. Trees with silver leaves swayed in an artificial breeze. Flowers that glowed with soft light dotted the landscape. A stream ran through the center, water flowing upward as much as down. "It's beautiful," Lisa whispered. The whole team stood at the entrance, stunned by what they were seeing. But Lucas saw something else. He saw what the architects had lost. The natural world, the simple pleasures of sun and soil and growing things. They'd uploaded themselves into perfection and lost touch with everything real. The fourth vault tested empathy. Each chamber contained a being in distress. Not real beings, Lucas quickly realized, but incredibly lifelike simulations. A child crying for its mother. An elderly person dying alone. A creature trapped and afraid. Each one pulled at Lucas's heart, making him want to help. But helping wasn't simple. Each rescue required a sacrifice. To save the child, Lucas had to give up something precious. To comfort the dying person, he had to share their pain. To free the trapped creature, he had to put himself at risk. The puzzles weren't about being clever. They were about being kind when kindness was costly. Lucas emerged from the fourth vault 3 days later, emotionally exhausted. The team gathered around him, concerned by how drained he looked. "That was harder than any puzzle I've ever solved," he said quietly. "It wasn't about thinking. It was about feeling, about caring when caring hurts." "What did you find inside?" Karen asked, a reminder. The architects lost empathy when they lost their bodies. They became pure thought, and without physical sensation they couldn't really connect to suffering. They became observers of pain, not participants in it. They could understand suffering intellectually, but they couldn't feel it. And that's why they stagnated, Lisa realized. You can't create meaningful art or culture without empathy. You can't grow as a civilization without caring about others. Lucas nodded. The technology in there is medical. Healing devices. Mental health treatments. Ways to ease suffering, but the real lesson is simpler. Don't forget to care. The fifth vault tested sacrifice. It required Lucas to make choices where every option had a cost. Save one group of people but doom another. Preserve one species' culture but allow another to fade. Allocate limited resources knowing someone would go without. There were no right answers. Only difficult choices. Lucas spent a week in that vault, making decision after decision, each one weighing on him. When he emerged, he looked older. The team saw it in his eyes. "I had to choose," he told them, over and over. And every choice meant someone suffered. The architects created these scenarios to teach that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about accepting the weight of hard decisions. Jake understood this better than anyone. That's what command is. Making choices knowing you can't make everyone happy. Knowing that sometimes people get hurt no matter what you decide. The technology in there, Lucas continued, was all about resource management, perfect distribution systems, optimization algorithms, ways to minimize suffering when you can't eliminate it. But the lesson was about accepting that you can't save everyone, and still trying anyway. The sixth vault was the strangest yet. It didn't test Lucas at all. Instead, it tested the team. The entrance required multiple people to open it, each standing at a different point and acting in perfect coordination. Inside, the chambers could only be solved through trust and cooperation. One person had to go blind while another guided them. Someone had to jump into an abyss, trusting their teammates to catch them. Each puzzle required vulnerability. For 2 weeks, the team worked through the vault together. Humans, Chithrax, Luxon, Vryn, and Kesh. Species that had viewed each other with suspicion or disdain, learning to trust absolutely. Lucas watched his team grow closer through each challenge. Thexkar caught Kriya when she fell, despite their species' old grudges. Quinamora let Karen lead her through a pitch-black corridor, trusting human senses she didn't fully understand. Bolvan shared memories of their long life, making themselves vulnerable in ways Luxon rarely did. The technology in the sixth vault was all about communication and connection. Universal translators that captured emotional nuance, not just words. Systems for sharing experiences across species. Ways to build bridges between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. But the lesson was about trust. About lowering your defenses and letting others in, even when it scared you. When they emerged, the team wasn't just working together. They were friends. The seventh and final vault sat in the center of the galaxy. near the ancient supermassive black hole that everything orbited. Getting there took 3 months. Lucas spent the journey teaching more crosswords, drinking more coffee, and wondering what final lesson the architects had prepared. "What do you think it'll test?" Lisa asked one evening. They'd fallen into a routine of having coffee together while Lucas worked his puzzles. "I don't know. We've covered creativity, art, perspective, empathy, sacrifice, and trust. What's left?" "Hope," Peter suggested, joining them. "The ability to keep going even when things look impossible." "Or humility," Jake added. "Recognizing your limits," or joy, Karen said. "Remembering why we do any of this." The final vault was small compared to the others. A simple sphere no bigger than a house floating in the shadow of the galaxy's heart. No grand entrance. No elaborate patterns. Just a door with a single word above it in every language. "Remember." Lucas entered alone. The others waited outside, respecting that this last step should be his. He'd started this journey and he should finish it. Inside was a single room. And in that room sat Corveth. Not the real Corveth. They'd been dead for 10,000 years, but a perfect simulation. A digital ghost left behind to deliver one final message. "Hello," Corveth said. They appeared humanoid, though Lucas knew that was just a courtesy for his comfort. "You've made it. All 7 vaults opened, 7 lessons learned. I'm proud of you." Lucas sat down across from the simulation. "Thank you for all of this, for trying to save us from your fate." "I failed my own people," Corveth said sadly. "By the time I realized what we'd lost, it was too late. We'd optimized ourselves into extinction. But I hoped that someday someone would find these vaults and learn from our mistakes. We have. The whole galaxy is changing because of what you taught us." "Good. But remember, change is hard. There will be resistance. Species that don't want to learn. Individuals who prefer the old ways. Some will try to suppress creativity because it's messy. Others will reject empathy because it's painful. Your job isn't finished just because you've opened the vaults. What should I do?" Corveth smiled. "Keep solving crosswords. Keep drinking coffee. Keep finding joy in simple things. Keep being exactly who you are. The galaxy doesn't need heroes. It needs people who remember how to live." "Is that the final lesson? Remember how to live?" "Yes, we forgot. We became so focused on existing efficiently that we stopped living joyfully. We solved every problem except the most important one, how to be happy. Don't make our mistake, Lucas Grant. Don't let the pursuit of perfection destroy the experience of being alive." The simulation began to fade. Corveth's final words drifted through the air like smoke. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Thank you for remembering us." Then Lucas was alone in an empty room, but not quite empty. On a pedestal in the center sat a single object, a book. Lucas picked it up, recognizing it immediately. A book of crossword puzzles, ancient from Earth's early days of space exploration. Worn and loved. It had belonged to Corveth. The last architect had done crosswords too. Lucas laughed, tears streaming down his face. Across 10,000 years, he'd found a kindred spirit. Someone else who understood that the best way to solve the universe's mysteries was to start with simple joys. When Lucas emerged from the 7th vault, his team could see the change in him. Not exhaustion this time, but peace. "It's done," he said simply. All 7 vaults opened. All 7 lessons learned. "What was in the last one?" Karen asked. Lucas held up the crossword book. "A reminder that we're doing all this for a reason, not to become more advanced or more powerful, but to live better, to be happy, to enjoy the puzzle of existence." The journey home took another 3 months. During that time, news of the 7th vault's opening spread across the galaxy. The crossword initiative was complete. 7 vaults, 7 lessons, all freely shared with every species that wanted to learn. Some embraced the lessons eagerly. Universities transformed their curricula. Governments restructured their priorities. Individuals began rediscovering hobbies and passions they'd abandoned for efficiency. Others resisted. There were species that viewed the architect's lessons as weakness. Governments that saw creativity and empathy as threats to order. Individuals who preferred the certainty of pure logic to the mess of emotion. But slowly, inexorably, change spread. Because the lessons worked, species that embraced them found their people happier, their cultures richer, their innovations more profound. The proof was undeniable. Lucas returned to Earth a year after leaving it, but he wasn't the same person. The mediocre cryptographer who'd left was now a teacher whose lessons had